Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be breaking down a little bit of the NHL draft here that the Montreal Canadiens took some picks in, as well as some of the trades and other kind of news that's gone on in the last few days here. We'll start off with the NHL draft here. We had a pretty good draft in my opinion. Obviously when you pick kind of low down in the first round, it doesn't get to be as exciting as some other drafts that we've had where we pick in the top five. It's a little bit more exciting, but I felt like the Canadiens still found a way to make something happen out of this. This is kind of the first year also where the Canadiens haven't, at least not yet, made kind of a big move for a now roster player. I think in the past couple of years we've made moves like for Noah Dobson last year, or Patrick Laine even. We made that move not too long ago, or we make a move for Alex Newhook, like the trades like that. We haven't really seen one of those yet. Obviously, there's been some discussions about maybe trading with the Blue Jackets for Marchenko, or they've been talks for like a year about Kyrou, and that kind of fell through and all that kind of stuff. But there's still stuff, in the air looming a little bit. So we'll have to see what Ken Hughes does as we go into free agency coming up in a couple days. But the draft was pretty interesting, and we'll start off with that with pick number 26. We had the 28th pick, and then as we got closer to that pick 26, the Montreal Canadiens decided to trade up two positions to get that 26th overall selection. And with that selection, they tipped Gleb Pugachev, and this is a guy who I don't think unless you're an absolute nerd, and I mean obviously me talking about this, I'm kind of in that category now, but I had no idea who this guy was previous to the Montreal Canadiens selecting him, but after kind of taking a look at some of his film, looking at his stats, all that kind of stuff, I'm pretty excited to see what this guy can do on American soil, or in North America, playing in the AHL, NHL, whatever it's going to end up being. Obviously he's going to end up back in the KHL for at least one more year, probably two, because that's when his contract is expiring in 2028 there. But this is a guy who he was from Kazakhstan. He played a little bit in the KHL, a little bit in the VHL, and a little bit in the MHL, all over the spectrum in the minors and majors there in the Russian atmosphere there. He had 3 points, 2 goals, 1 assist for 3 total points in 13 games played in the KHL, which is pretty solid for a draft eligible player. He's he was 17 at that time, just turned 18 recently. So for him to get 3 points in his first KHL season as a kid still is very, very impressive to me. In the VHL, he only played 15 games there, but he got 1 goal, 4 assists for 5 points there. And then in the MHL, which is kind of like the minor leagues of the Russian league there, he had 10 goals, 14 assists for 24 points in 33 games played. So not necessarily breaking the charts like Ivan Demidov was, or even Zorovsky in his the year after his draft here, but he's a young kid. He's still pretty raw in a lot of ways, but what's really exciting about him is the way that he plays off the puck. This guy just hits anything that moves out there. He's a big kid too. He's 6'3", 200 pounds ish, according to elite prospects there. I think there's been some debate, but he's definitely a tall guy. He's 6'2", 6'3", something like that, and he hits everywhere. He's got that big motor. He skates really, really well, and he hits anything that moves, as I just said. Like, he is all over the place. And he's got some offensive skill too. He's made some highlights there, some nice moves. He's able to score on breakaway chances and things like that. He's able to find a way to contribute offensively. He's got some skill with his hands. He's no Demidov, obviously, in that category, but he's got some skill there. He's got a good shot on his hands there. But really, it's Kent Hughes in the draft, after breaking everything down, talked about the comp for him being Tom Wilson, and I feel like I absolutely agree with that. Who knows what's going to happen as he gets to the NHL level, but he definitely seems like a guy that nobody wants to play against. He's very much a player who will get in your face and play a gritty style, and that's something that the Canadiens don't have right now. And I think that's very exciting to see. A player that can play like that coming to the Montreal organization. So very excited about that. Another thing that excites me about Gleb too is the way that he is able to produce in the playoffs too. Only 24 points in 33 games played in the regular season, but 9 points in 16 games played in the postseason. So he kept up, continue to produce in the playoffs as well for that MHL team. I think that that's something, obviously, we just lost in the playoffs, right, in the Eastern Conference Finals. We need guys who can perform in the playoffs, and for that reason, I kind of comp him a little bit more to Josh Anderson and the way that he's able to elevate his game in the playoffs while also playing kind of a high motor game, but putting the body on and stuff like that. If he can kind of be a blend of Josh Anderson, Tom Wilson, those kind of guys, that's a huge addition to this team. So very much excited about that. And then we go to the second round there. We also traded up to 57th overall to get Timothy Runso. He was playing in the WHL this season, is going to be playing in Miami, Ohio in the NCAA next season. He's a right-hand defenseman there. So that's something that this team is lacking a little bit. Ryan Bacher being pretty much the only one we've got right now. So that's definitely something that bolsters our depth a little bit. He's a U.S.-born player, got some Belarusian roots to him. Again, played in the WHL. He got 11 goals, 33 assists for 44 total points in 68 games played. Didn't play in the playoffs at all, but looking at his highlight package, he's got a little bit of everything. He's got some offensive upside. It definitely seems like he's a guy who wants to play a little bit more in that offensive zone. He had some good goals. It felt like to me he was really able to, when he got the puck on a stick and an opportunity to shoot the puck, he was able to score. He's able to put the puck in dangerous situations, both from the point and down lower. He had some one-timer goals from down low, some shots from the point that found a way through. Also had some great vision. I feel like that's definitely the strong point of his game there. He had a lot of great vision. He was able to move the puck both in the defensive zone, offensive zone. I saw a lot of highlights from him through my research on these guys that he's able to move the puck very well offensively and defensively. He wins battles, does a lot of those things right. The only thing that I kind of have criticism with his game is he's a little bit slow. He doesn't really seem like the fastest or the smoothest skater to me. I think it's smooth. I would say is probably okay to say, but he doesn't necessarily get moving very quickly. So it's something that he'd probably want to work on, the speed aspect of it. But I think his vision for the game, offensively especially, is something that kind of excites me about him. Especially considering the fact that he's 6'3", 190 pounds at the moment. A guy like that, if he can get going and break into the NHL, he's going to be a really solid player to put, in our decor there, a guy who can find, passing lanes and make stuff happen there. He was quarterbacking the power play on his team in the WHL there, so that's some good experience for him as well. So, this is one that, I think will be a project. I think a lot of these picks coming up, pretty much all of the picks are in this draft are quite a bit of a project there, but, a lot of these guys that we drafted a lot of size in this draft, and this is another player that I think could very well work out well for us. Should be exciting to see what happens there. Then we go to the third round. We got Cooper Cleaves, another right-hand defenseman, U.S. playing in Dartmouth this upcoming season. He got 4 goals, 6 assists for 10 points in 30 games played last season in the NCAA. He's 20 years old, so a bit of an overager player. I think this is his second year or even third year of eligibility for the draft, and he gets selected here. So another one where it's a bit of a project there. It'll be interesting to see what ends up happening with him. But obviously a little bit of a shortened season for him in the NCAA. Wasn't able to play in those playoff games either, but he only had one playoff game that he could have ended up playing for Dartmouth. But either way, from what I've been able to see, he looks like he's still, even if he's an overager, he's still got a little bit of a raw talent there, and he's still kind of developing his game, and somebody that, if he's able to kind of develop and get a little bit better, he can find a way to be really successful. He plays more of a shutdown role is what I can tell. He's more of a, defensive defenseman. He's 6'3", 191 pounds. So, another guy we need some shutdown guys as well in our roster. A lot of our defensemen in the NHL roster are very much offensively minded, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course. But when you have guys like Lane Hudson and Noah Dobson doing the bulk of the work offensively on defense, it's nice to have somebody on D to kind of play more of a shutdown role. And if this Cooper Cleaves guy is able to develop into a guy that can crack the NHL roster, that's exactly the kind of player that I think the Montreal Canadiens need right now on their D-core line. So that'll be interesting there. Then we go to Braden Klimke with 117th overall selection. He's a left-handed defenseman here, but this guy is definitely more of an offensively minded guy, and I was actually very impressed with his highlight package. He was playing in the Saskatoon Blades in the WHL there. He's going to be playing in North Dakota in the NCAA this upcoming season there. He got 4 goals, 42 assists for 46 points in 68 games played in the WHL. He also got 5 points, 1 goal, 4 assists for 5 points in the playoffs in the WHL this season. He's a guy who's like a little bit quicker for his size too. He's a 6'1" guy. So I feel like it's definitely a guy who has a little bit more of a motor to him. I think he really impressed me in his highlight package with his vision. He was making great passes in a lot of those highlight clips. He was able to find nice passes on the power play and elsewhere, just making really good plays all around the puck in the offensive zone, generating a lot of offense. And you can tell, he's got 42 assists in this season here. He was definitely moving the puck very, very well. The times where he was getting shots off for goals, they looked like pretty solid shots, but he's definitely, a pass first kind of player. He's definitely not much of a shooter at all. So, but I feel like the vision from him I was really impressed by. He's a guy who, again, is a bit of a project. You'd like to see a little bit more shooting maybe. We say the same thing about Demidov when he's out there too. So, it's all across the board. But he was definitely a guy who impressed me to get, at 117th overall, a guy who's got vision like that, who can make some nice passes and, set up his teammates. I think that's a really good player to have in your system. Be interesting to see what happens with him in the NCAA. Obviously, it's a bit of a step up from the WHL, the CHL in general. So be interesting to follow him there. But yeah, I really like that pick actually coming into the 4th round here. And then at 189th overall, we've got Parker Trottier, who of course is the grandson of Brian Trottier, the legendary NHL player there with the Islanders. This guy is a left winger from the U.S. National Development Team program. He's going to be playing in Notre Dame in the NCAA this upcoming season. He had 11 goals, 16 assists for 27 points in 61 games played with the U18 team, and 8 goals, 6 assists for 14 points in the junior team in 24 games played there. Only 1 assist for 1 point in 5 games played at this recent World Juniors for the U.S. team as well. So, he's been around. He was on the World Juniors team, which not a lot of players are, obviously. And he's able to get a point out of it. Pretty solid numbers for a guy who's playing, with guys playing older than him. That's kind of what the national development team is. You're playing kind of, above your skill level or above your age level anyway. And he was able to produce at a pretty solid level there. Obviously, he's got hockey in his blood, so you can definitely take that for what that is. He seems like a guy who's got a pretty high motor. He's 6'1", 185, and from what I saw from him, he was really just getting to the front of the net and doing kind of the dirty work. He had a pretty solid shot, definitely a shot first mentality is what I saw from him. Very much the opposite of the previous pick. I think a lot of the highlights, clips that I saw from him were just him, ripping the puck when he got the chance to, and he had a pretty solid shot. He was able to find a way to score some goals with that. Definitely a raw player in my opinion. It feels like to me, it didn't really feel like he commanded the ice all that much. Just when the puck found him, he was able to kind of rip a puck on net, and whatever happened. He got some goals out of it. Obviously got some assists as well, 16 of them this season. So he's able to, to make some plays, and I felt like he was a guy who, had some potential moving forward, but definitely a project there. But, I think in a lot of ways you're excited about him because of, what his grandfather is, and, if he can be, even a fraction of that, that would be a very, very solid pickup for the Montreal Canadiens at 189th. And then one more pick later, 190th overall, we get Wesley Royston. He's a right winger. He was playing in the Erie Otters organization and then got traded traded over to Owen Sound in the OHL this past season there. Combined between those two teams, he had 12 goals, 7 assists for 19 points in 59 games played. Only didn't get any points in the 4 playoff game play he had with Owen Sound there, but this guy is definitely very similar to Parker Trottier as well. He was a big, solid skater. He had a solid shot. He was 6'4", this guy. So we definitely drafting for height in this draft. I don't think we had a single guy under 6 foot in this entire draft, and this guy is no exception. At 6'4" there, I felt like this guy really does command space in the offensive zone there. I felt like he was moving the puck around very well. He was doing big things with his body there, which is something that even like Uri Slavkovsky, when he came into the league, he was very much he was struggling to use his body, and it felt like Wesley Royston kind of had an idea of what he was doing there with his body there. I felt like he played big. He was using his shot. He was getting to the net and putting shots on net. Didn't really see too much else from him in that highlight package. Not much of a passer, not much of a skater outside of that. But the things that he does well, he was able to do pretty well. And if he's able to kind of round out the rest of his game, that could be another great pick. And if any of these guys pan out, it'd be huge to have a guy in our lineup with that kind of size and skill that can come in and kind of bolster our bottom 6 or middle 6, something like that, and be a big presence there. Then we go into the 7th round here. We have Jean-Samuel Daigneault. He's a left-handed defenseman, and this guy, from the highlight packages that I've seen, this guy just does not give anything. He hits everything that moves, a lot like Gleb Pugachev there, except this guy is playing on the back end there. A big defenseman, and like the highlight package that I saw from him, I didn't see him touch the puck even once. This guy just hits everything that comes towards him. He's laying up open ice hits, hits on the boards. Some pretty solid defensive play. Not all the hits are just going for hits. He's making good solid defensive plays with his body there. If he's able to kind of round out the rest of his defensive game, like with the puck on his stick and all that kind of stuff. It could be, a guy who comes in and does some damage in the NHL, kind of like we've seen, Arbor Jacki be able to do with, the heavy hits that he's able to deliver, with also, being pretty responsible at both ends of the ice. But yeah, the hits that he was able to pull off in this highlight package were really impressive. He only had five assists for 5 total points in 47 games played in the OHL, in the USHL. He's playing in the OHL next season. No points in the 12 playoff games he played, but yeah, they drafted him absolutely for the physical nature that he brings to this team, and that's exactly what the Canadiens need. So understandable there. And then with the last pick in the NHL draft as a whole, 224th overall, we get Tyler Dekos. He's a right winger there, Canadian-born player. Played a little bit in the AJHL and then got transferred over to the USHL, the Waterloo Blackhawks. In the AJHL, he had 8 goals, 7 assists for 15 points in 10 games played, and then going over to the USHL, 7 goals, 10 assists for 17 points in 19 games played in that USHL. So he's putting up pretty good numbers there, in leagues that aren't necessarily super impressive, but either way, he's putting in, some good numbers there. He had a really good shot from what I saw there. He was able to, obviously you can see the goals, 15 total goals between those two different leagues there. He was able to, put the puck on net, and from what, scouting has been saying, and from what I saw in the clips, he has a pretty NHL ready shot. He's one of the better shooters, in the draft class, in those leagues that he's playing in there. So, definitely, it's a skill set for him. Everything else kind of needs some work, but I thought like he had a pretty good motor. He was getting around. He had the motor. He was going for the pucks. He was skating hard, and that's kind of, I think it's a silly thing to say in some rights, to be like, oh, like he was skating, but I think there are players out there who don't put the effort in every shift, and I think it's good to see a guy who is playing and wants the puck and wants to to put everything out there on the ice every time he's out there. I think that's another guy that I saw that was doing those kinds of things, and I think for a guy who's getting picked the very last in the NHL draft, a pretty solid pickup. Also another 6'1" guy, so again some banking on the size and all of those other factors there, and the shot is there too. So if those things all pan pan out the way that, that it could potentially pan out if things go well for him, that could be another great pickup for the Canadiens there. So that's pretty much the entirety of the NHL draft there. So pretty good all around for them. I feel like, the Gleb Pugachev pick is really the exciting factor there. I think, that's a guy that is going to be exciting to watch, and I believe he's also been invited to the upcoming development camp for the new guys for the Montreal Canadiens organization. So it'd be really exciting to see what he can do with some of our other prospects at that camp there. You see if he, lays the body, gets some goals in there, and it'd be very exciting to watch. Very exciting to see him, in a North American environment with some of our other prospects and see how he fares there as compared to, playing in the KHL. It'll be very interesting to see how that goes. Some of these other guys here, mixing them together. It'll be interesting to see, those guys playing together, and then obviously we'll have to be watching, all of these prospects in their respective leagues as they come into this upcoming season and see, who's kind of, soaring upwards and who's fallen down a little bit. So, yeah, very interesting. But I think overall a pretty solid draft for the Canadiens. I'm pretty happy with what they were able to come up with. Obviously, I still want to see some trades. I want to see some players who are playing right now, but it'll be interesting to see where things go from here. Then next on the list of items to talk about, we have a couple trades that the Montreal Canadiens have made over the last couple days here. Starting from the beginning, we had Hunter McCown coming to Montreal in exchange for Luke Tuck, making a trade with the Columbus Blue Jackets there. Hunter McCown is, a U.S.-born player, 23 years old. He's a center/right wing guy, 6'1", 185. So again, trading for some size there. Luke Tuck also had some size, of course, but, it's still trading for size and trading for another center too. So I think it's kind of, I think they definitely recognize that the lack of centers is a bit of a problem in the organization. So grabbing another one of those, even if this guy is going to play, in the AHL for the entirety of next season and probably for a while after that, it's still kind of interesting to see. He had 9 goals, 16 assists for 25 points in 63 AHL games. Definitely some upside here. He's got some size, got a little bit of skill. He played some pretty solid. From what I saw in the highlight packages from when he was playing with the Cleveland Monsters in the AHL, definitely some skilled plays in there. He uses his body pretty well. He gets around the ice. He's one of the faster skaters out there. So, definitely, some upside there. It'd be interesting to see, what happens if he's able to kind of, flourish in the new scenery playing in Montreal. If that's the case, I could maybe even see him coming up into the NHL and getting a shot there. Obviously, that's not likely. He's probably going to end up just being a helping hand in Laval for some of our other prospects there. But definitely some upside there, and you're not really missing too much for Luke Tuck, who had 14 points in 68 games there. So you're trading for a guy who was a little bit more successful, pretty similar age range. Hunter McCown's a year younger and had more points by a good margin there. So a pretty solid trade overall, and it'll be interesting to see if he's able to, crack the NHL roster, at any point in the next couple of years or whatever. But, definitely some good upside and a pretty solid trade, in my opinion. The second trade there, we traded with the New York Rangers. We got Brett Berard. We traded away William Trudeau. Brett Berard is another U.S. guy. He's 23 years old, left winger, 5'9" there. So another guy that we're going for the short guys there. And that's a smart pick, obviously. We know how well smaller players are able to perform in the Montreal atmosphere, especially playing with Martin St. Louis as their coach. I think this is a guy who can really benefit from playing with Martin St. Louis, and I think that Martin St. Louis is a guy who has been able to elevate young players and get the most out of them. And Brett Berard is a guy who is only one season removed from 10 points in 35 games played with the New York Rangers in the NHL. Pretty good shot, good motor guy. This is a guy who we're buying low on. He didn't have any points in the 13 games played he had in the NHL this season. He had 6 goals, 16 assists for 22 points in 41 games played in the AHL. So taking a shot at a guy who, had a bit of a down year this year and could definitely come back and, make an impact. He was making an impact with, the Rangers in the 2024-2025 season. So, if you can get, him back to that kind of level, he could potentially be a bottom six guy who, has a little bit of an impact. I even kind of see some, some Brendan Gallagher similarities in him compared to, what I've seen from, obviously Brendan Gallagher, the way that he's been able to perform over the last 14 years in Montreal. I feel like Brett Berard kind of gives a similar vibe there. He's able to, make use of his opportunities. He's good with his size. He plays the body a little bit, even though he is a smaller player there. So, it'd be interesting to see if Martin St. Louis can get him going a little bit and get the most out of him. And if that's the case, then we've got ourselves, a Gallagher replacement there who can play on the bottom six and make an impact. So, kind of a good trade. We give away William Trudeau in that trade. He's a 6'1" defenseman there, left-hand defenseman, 8 goals, 12 assists for 20 points in 62 AHL games. So not missing too much, especially considering the fact that we just drafted a ton of defensemen in this draft, some of which will end up in the AHL in the next couple of years, I would imagine. So makes sense to to trade away some of those assets while they still have some value to them, and it didn't really seem like with the depth that we have that we're going to give either of those guys, Tuck or Trudeau, a chance in the NHL anytime soon. So makes sense to trade for a guy like Berard and get a little bit of upside. Is potentially a guy who could play some NHL minutes this season at a depth role there. So I really like that trade overall. And then the third one coming in today, we had Maximilian Zuber is coming to Montreal in exchange for Joshua Waugh. This one kind of stings a little bit. Joshua Waugh never really panned out the way that we would have liked to see him pan out in Montreal. He played pretty solid minutes and got some great points in the AHL. He had 23 goals, 22 assists for 45 points in 57 games played in the AHL, which is solid numbers. Never really planned out the way that we wanted it to in the NHL. He didn't have any points in the 36 games played. He played in the 2026 season in the NHL there. So unfortunate there. It's just like anytime it got to NHL play, it didn't really seem to work out for Waugh. And as a guy that definitely had some upside, and maybe a change of scenery is going to change things for him, but at this time and over the last couple of years hasn't really worked out. So they're going to go with, a kind of a project a little bit. This Maximilian Zuber, part Poland and Polish and German combo there. He's 23 years old, left-hand defenseman. He's 6'3", 201 pounds. In last season in the AHL with the Tucson Roadrunners, he had 11 goals, 16 assists for 27 points and 65 games played, which is pretty solid numbers for a defenseman there, a young defenseman playing in the AHL. He's a very smooth skating, a big D-man. He's got some good offensive skill to him as well. From what I saw, he was playing some pretty good minutes and was getting some good skill plays in. He had a breakaway opportunity. He scored a couple shootout goals when he was playing over in the German leagues before getting to the AHL. I think he's a guy who's got some offensive upside. He's a big a big left-hand defenseman there, and he's a good guy that could potentially be like Adam Enstrom, cracking an NHL lineup when there's an injury or something like that coming in. I think that this is again like a solid move. I feel like it sucks a little bit that Waugh never really worked out, and I feel like especially considering what his AHL numbers look like, he's a guy who's just like begging for a shot to make something happen, and hopefully Utah is the one to give him that shot. But it's unfortunate to see a player of his caliber go, but at the same time it wasn't really working out, and we got to sell him before things really start to tank in terms of his value. As it is, we didn't really get anything incredibly impressive for him, but at the same time, the super defenseman here could very well be a guy who makes a big impact in the AHL and then eventually come up to the NHL and be a guy who's a solid player for us and our depth defenseman there. So it's a good pick for me, a good trade in my opinion, and be interesting to see how he plays in the new atmosphere with the Laval Rocket and maybe even the Montreal Canadiens coming up. And then we have good news and bad news in the last two spots here for news coming in those last couple of weeks here. The good news being that Carey Price was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame this upcoming cycle here. So obviously big congratulations there. I felt like he should have gotten it last year. Obviously, I think that there was probably some debate as to whether or not he should have been eligible, considering the fact that he was still on contract with San Jose at that point, because we traded his contract a year ago. But absolutely deserved. He was like incredible when he was in the Montreal organization. He did everything he needed to do. You can watch my video from a year ago where I kind of talked about him when he got traded from Montreal to San Jose, or his contract got traded anyway. But he was absolutely the lone shining star of the previous era of Montreal players before Kent Hughes and everybody in this current era got here. But yeah, like he did everything that he needed to do to win a cup, except for have people playing offense in front of him to actually score goals. But yeah, like he absolutely deserved, and it's very cool to see a guy like that who very much deserves it get the flowers that he deserves and get inducted into the Hall of Fame there. So very, very cool. The bad news is, unfortunately, Brendan Gallagher was traded from the Montreal Canadiens to the Vancouver Canucks today. It was something we all saw coming, obviously, and it was very cool that a guy who played in Vancouver in his youth and is kind of from that area gets to kind of go back there and play for kind of his hometown a little bit in whatever the final few seasons of his career is going to look like. It's pretty cool to see that, in my opinion. But it's also kind of a tough thing. Like Montreal kind of dropped the ball on this one. I feel like a little bit. I feel like obviously it was going to happen. The team was kind of evolving past the need for a guy like Gallagher, and he's getting older as well. So it made sense that was going to happen. But it's unfortunate the way that it ended, even though it was going to happen. And I think the loss is going to be felt in the locker room as well. You can already kind of see a lot of the players have posted their goodbyes and all that kind of stuff for him. And I feel like I'm feeling it as well. I feel like a guy who he's been around for 14 seasons with the Montreal Canadiens, and it's unfortunate to see him part ways. It would be really cool, and I feel like he deserves the opportunity to to retire as a Montreal Canadien. But at the same time, he deserves a chance to play, and I felt like he was capable of playing in the last few games of the playoffs this season. Playing more time for the Canadiens in general, especially in the playoffs, because he's one of those guys who really just elevates his game in the playoff atmosphere there. But it's unfortunate to see that happen, but I'm happy that he's able to continue playing for a team that can definitely use his services a little bit more than the Montreal Canadiens currently can. But still very sad to see him go. Throughout his career, he had 246 goals, 241 assists for 487 total points and 911 games played, all with the Montreal Canadiens over the last 14 seasons there. So a very, very solid career for a guy who is undersized and undervalued, and nobody thought he was going to be able to do anything. He comes in and makes it happen there. He had 14 goals, 20 assists for 34 points in 79 career playoff games as well. So definitely making an impact. The goals that come to mind for me, or the goal he had in the 2021 first round Game 7, where he kind of just came in on that left side and just shot one right through the legs of Jack Campbell there, and that ended up being a goal that would end up winning Game 7 over the Toronto Maple Leafs in round 1 of what would be a Stanley Cup final run for the Montreal Canadiens in 2021. That might be my favorite goal of his overall. The other one I can think of is this past playoffs and against Tampa. We put him in the lineup and he scores, only a few minutes into the game, just crashing the net. And that's exactly what Brendan Gallagher did throughout his entire career, is just crash the net, get in people's face and, just do the dirty work, right? Like, I think, there's so many players who aren't willing to do that these days. And, Brendan Gallagher was always a guy who just, despite his size and the fact that he wasn't the most, skilled player out there, he always, he put his head down and got to work and went to the dirty areas and got those dirty goals. And he will definitely be missed in Montreal here. And I'm definitely feeling that loss right now, and I think it's really, symbolic in a way as well. To have Brendan Gallagher, leave the team here to play somewhere else. It really shows that this Montreal Canadiens organization is turning a new leaf. They've been doing it for a number of years now, but this is another big, step towards this team being completely, removed from what we've saw before. Phil Deneau obviously coming back kind of puts a wrinkle in that a little bit, but at the same time, it's like this is a different team now. This is a new era in Montreal that just saw the team go to the Eastern Conference Finals there, and hopefully that the sky's the limit for this team, and it's very symbolic in my opinion to have a guy like that leave the team, and it really shows that the Canadiens are a team who's looking to contend and looking to get better, and we can't have people just like slacking behind a little bit. And I still feel like Brendan Gallagher can provide for the team, and I would have liked to see him stick around at least a little bit longer and show that he's worth putting out in the lineup. But at the same time, it's a new team. It's a new season coming up this upcoming year where the Canadiens are going to have a massive target on their back after going to the the Eastern Conference Finals that past season. So it's going to be very interesting to see what goes on in terms of lineups. Who's going to be out there game one. Is going to be Marchenko out there? Who knows? But it's very symbolic, but also it's disappointing to see a guy like that who he's been the life, and he's been the heartbeat of the Canadiens for so many years now, and to see him leave the team is sad, but at the same time it's a new leaf for the team, and I'm excited to see what happens this upcoming year. So yeah, that's pretty much my whole spiel there. Thank you for listening. If you were actually listening to this entire thing, I packaged all of the news from the last couple of weeks into one big video here. So hopefully I covered everything, and I appreciate you guys listening to my thoughts. Very excited to see what free agency holds, and I'll probably make another video after the free agency frenzy of the first couple days kind of comes and goes, as to see what the Montreal Canadiens are going to be doing in free agency, who they're going to sign, who what any trades that end up being made over the last couple the first couple days of free agency there. So it'll be very interesting to see what goes on and what the projected roster is going to look like over the next couple of weeks. So thank you guys so much for watching this video, listening to me talk for way too long about the Montreal Canadiens, and I will see you after the free agency frenzy, and we'll see what our roster looks like.